Lord, we just thank you so much for this day. We thank you for the rain, even though I'm not really sure why we got quite so much of it, or will we still getting so much of it? Because I have a pond now flowing in the back of my house. So again, Lord, maybe it's just to help all the flowers pop up. So we just thank you ahead of time for that. We thank you for your word. We thank you for time together. We thank you for the opportunity to be able to just study it and be in it and hear your voice. And no matter what we're going through, Lord, as long as we are listening for you, we will hear you. And we just thank you for that. Lord, I ask you just to be with everyone that's watching and listening to today's class session. And again, we just love you so very much. And we love the stories that you give us. Lord, I pray this all in your son, Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. So I started this, and we're going to be looking primarily probably at Mark chapter 5, starting at verse 21, because we're going to be doing the story of the bleeding woman. She was like bleeding for 12 years. And it doesn't necessarily say this, but it's several different texts lead us to believe that it was about 12 years. And it was probably like some kind of lady type of issues that she was having. So it was either a menstrual thing. Um, we don't really know for sure, or it could have been like a urinary tract thing, or it was just one of those things that it was like super bad. But before I started going on this, I noticed when I was looking at Matthew that his version of it was like super short. And then I went to Mark and I was like, okay, that gives me a little more details. And then I went to Luke because it's also in that one. And I was like, okay, well, this one gives more, definitely more details than Matthew. And then I was like, okay, Matthew is there. Okay. And he gives like the Cliff Notes version. It's super short compared to the other two versions. So then I was like, okay, let's look at Matthew's background here. So he was a disciple, so that meant he was a eyewitness to everything that happened, right? And his previous occupation was like an accountant. He was a numbers guy. So I'm like, okay, I can kind of see now why his version would be so short. Like it was just like this is what happened and that was it. Like he didn't go into the much of details. And then I was like, okay, what about Mark? So Mark was not a disciple, but he accompanied Paul on his first missionary like journey, adventure, whatever you want to call it. He wrote it between AD 55 and 65. And just a little short history, AD means domini is what I want to say. I'm saying that right. And it means the year of our Lord. So I just think that's really fun because people don't think that. They just think it means after death, and it does, but it doesn't type of thing. But it's to honor the Lord. And I'm like, our timeline's even built on that. And nobody really wants to, I should say, not very many people want to recognize that. So that's just a little history there as well. But back to this. It may have been the first gospel written, which was Mark. Again, not an eyewitness, which meant if his was the first one, it was written even before Matthew. So I was like, how did he know? Like, if he wasn't there, how did he know all this stuff that happened? Well, I found out that he recorded the most miracles as well. So again, like how? Like how did he know all this stuff? Peter. Peter was the connection. Peter was the witness, and Mark was accompanying Peter. So that meant he was like his scribe. He was interviewing him. He was gathering up all the teachings and accounts of Peter. So I thought that was really cool because I was like, how in the world did like these guys get this information? Then there's Luke. Luke was a doctor by trade, a Greek, not even a Jew. He was the first Gentile Christian to write probably a gospel. And then I was like, okay, well, how did he know all this? Well, his connection is Paul, which also was not an eyewitness to Jesus in the same terms as the disciples, but we'll get to him on a different day. So, how did Luke do this? Well, Luke knew Paul. It sounds like, have you guys heard the like 5 levels of Kevin Bacon or something like that? It's like you're trying to connect everybody to him somehow. That's how I felt like when I was going down this rabbit hole this weekend. Okay, so Paul also wrote Acts, okay? Okay, so Paul didn't write Acts. I learned that Luke wrote Acts, okay, just to make that one, which I didn't know that one either. He wrote this about 60 80, so that meant it came after Mark's, okay? So the other thing thought was, okay, well, how did he do this? Okay, he was a diligent, sorry, I'm looking down at my notes so I don't get this messed up. He was a diligent researcher, historian, not an eyewitness. He interviewed early disciples and even maybe Jesus's mom. He may have even interviewed Mary, okay? He traveled with Paul, so that meant he got to see and access to lots of different documents, records, people, and he used the Gospel of Mark as maybe like his guide. So the breakdown that I came up with was um he of the whole story, okay? This is the breakdown, not of those. We're done with those now. That's all I had to go with those. But I just thought it was very interesting because people would ask, like, well, if they weren't there, how do they know? They were like very good investigators is mostly it. And like when investigative journalism was like a real thing, this is like where they started it. This is like the founding fathers of that type of thing. um so the breakdown and the kind of summary is so Jesus was barely off the boat. Remember, so he was like had came across the sea. They think he was like in Capernaum again. And he was like barely off this boat, and a large crowd had already gathered. That's in Matthew or Mark, verse 21. It's like the very first thing. So that meant if there's already a large crowd that had gathered and was traveling, like that word got out like faster than a pat of butter on a hot biscuit. Like it was super fast. Okay, so I've kind of got this in different points. So if I'm going too fast, just tell me to slow down, okay? But I was like, oh, this is like so good. So I wanted to make sure I get through like as much as I could. So this starts out that with Jairus. And Mark and Luke, they're the two that mention that. Mark or Matthew does not mention anything about Jairus as far as those details. Remember, he's the short Cliff Notes version type of thing of what happened. So Jairus was a synagogue leader. um he probably helped take care of like building maintenance, worship, songs, um like supervising that type of thing. I saw one note that said maybe he was even in charge of like the weekly school type of thing. He had close ties to the Pharisees. Remember, those were like we didn't like they made up a bunch of rules that had nothing to do with really what the Bible said. They just kept adding on and adding on and adding on. Remember, the Pharisees hated Jesus too, by the way. So you've got a guy from the synagogue that not really hung out, but he like kind of worked for the Pharisees type of thing, right? So it's a bad combination type of thing. So when Jairus goes to Jesus, his daughter is most likely, he doesn't know it yet, already passed away. She's already dead. But Jairus falls to Jesus' feet. Now, I can only imagine because the Pharisees are probably there watching all of this, right? And that had to have put him like in a really bad spot later on, um, to go to the guy that the Pharisees hated, right? And he was just like, I need you to come. You're the only one that's going to help her. I need you to come help my daughter. She is dying, type of thing. He's pleading him to go. And I just kept thinking, man, that had to have taken courage because he knew he was like behind the scenes. So he knew what the Pharisees were talking and how they were talking about Jesus. He heard all the mumbles and the whispers and all of that stuff. Um, Point two, there was a huge crowd pressing on Jesus. So when um, this lady, I don't know, I can just imagine that the thoughts of this woman. And just a little side note, she's not mentioned by name here. And I love that. And I'll tell you that here in just a second on why I love that she doesn't have a name. But we don't even know if she was local or if she traveled. There's speculation that she did travel because there's several places that say that she used up all her resources on doctors to try to figure out what was wrong with her and what was the deal, right? So she had she was broke. She was completely broke. I was watching an episode of The Chosen and they kind of went over this story and they had her like doing laundry because nobody would really know. And she was by herself, so she wouldn't have to work with other people. So again, the bleeding could have been like a menstrual thing, it could have been a urinary tract thing. Either one, it was definitely a woman kind of bleeding, I'm guessing. So it wasn't like from her nose or her ears or something of that sort. Back then, if a woman was bleeding, she was considered unclean by Jewish law. They based that off of Leviticus 15 verses 19 through 30. Typically, the duration of a woman being unclean and not being touched, she couldn't touch anyone because that would make them unclean, type of thing, was like 7 days. But hers didn't just last 7 days, it lasted years. So, anything she touched, sat on, laid on was ceremonially unclean, not, you know what I mean? Not physically. So there was no human touching, and the Pharisees were strictly adhering to that rule. If anyone was bleeding, type of thing, it would make, if they got touched, then they were like, oh no, I have to go and completely wash myself. Then they would have to go and like be by themselves for so long because then that's how they thought that it was like a huge or a debacle for them, right? Huge inconvenience type of thing. Um, so they led to severe isolation because I don't know. I feel like it was just like a selfish thing on their part because that's just how they come across to me. So the biggest thing is here, like Jesus allowed her to touch him. He knew that she was bleeding. Let's think about this. He already knew this. So to let him touch her or her touch him, sorry, then it was like a huge thing because he was on his way to another place to help somebody else, right? So if she touched him, that would have made him unclean and then he wouldn't have been able to go on to the next part of his mission of his um spot. He wouldn't be able to go to that next spot. So she was definitely afraid of like doing this, but she was desperate at the same time. She just knew that he was the answer to helping her and that was like no doctor could help her. And if you had heard, hey, there's this dude not in a nearby spot where she was at and she was just like and he's healing other people because some of those stories had already gotten out and I can't imagine that she was just like I can do like he's the only one that can help me do this. So she what did she do? She was in this mass crowd, right? And it wasn't just her touching him, which I find kind of like I can see it from the disciples' point of view at this point. So she just touched like the hem of his garment at that point. Like she was just reaching at that point, just reaching out for him and just being like, I just need to touch something of this man. Um, so by the time with all these people pushing, I can imagine she was pushing and she just kind of like almost like she didn't grab, she just kind of brushed her hand as how I picture it. And he turns around and was like so I call this the "oh crap" moment. That she hadn't planned on him knowing it was her because she was just like, "I know that this is the guy that's gonna help me. There's tons of people around here," so she didn't wanna embarrass him, I think was part of it. She didn't wanna be embarrassed because 'cause she'd already been embarrassed enough because anytime somebody saw her at this point, they already knew that she was unclean according to society, right? So, but he knew. He turned around and he was like, "Who touched me?" And his disciples were like, "What are you talking about? There's 100 people touching you right now." And he stopped and he was like, "No, someone touched me. I felt power leave me." And I was like, I can imagine in her head, because I would have probably been the same way, that when he stopped, I would have been so scared that he was gonna be mad at me for doing that because, again, unclean, he wouldn't been able to go to the next spot if he felt the same way the Pharisees did. So so yeah, I was just like she was probably thinking he was mad, he's gonna be upset with her, um, go off on her type of thing. And but he wasn't. So she, when he turned around and asked, she like hurry up and just spat out her whole story. So I'm like, what courage that had to take, because she had to tell him what it was. And then that meant that if somebody didn't know who she was in the crowd, well, they did now because she told him, right? But he didn't get mad at her. He didn't go off on her. She saw in him just like pure compassion, pure care, pure love, um, for doing it. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And it says that he was pleased by her faith in him. Um, and she didn't burden him. It wasn't like, oh, it's a huge inconvenience. Now I've got to go do this. He didn't have any of those feelings. And I just was like, man, like if I was in that same position of her during that time, I can't imagine like just the relief you would feel of knowing that you weren't going to get in trouble, because that's kind of how I grew up in my childhood and stuff like that. Like I was just as scared to do anything because I felt like I was getting it. Nothing I did was right, and I was always getting in trouble for something. Even stuff I didn't do, I was still getting in trouble for it. But he turned around and he didn't forget about her. He could have just like, oh, I felt power leave me and that's it. I'm done. And just kept on walking. But I love that he stopped and he didn't forget about her, and he acknowledged her, and he said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. And not just like, I don't know, when I read that, you guys, I'm going to tell you a little story about my history a little bit and why that particular verse just gets me every single time, especially behind the story of it. Um, so she was no named here, right? She didn't have a name. I'm gonna guess it's probably like Mary, because it seems like everybody back then was named Mary, and it could have been. But at this point, I want you guys just to think that she doesn't have a name, and this is why. Okay, so a few years ago, I was married to a man, and it was my second husband, and it was a very short-lived, marriage type of thing. It was one of those things I thought for sure that God had brought me this person, because I had just came out of a, um well, not just, but I had previously been in a very abusive, toxic relationship. And in my head, I'm like, "Oh, he's not like this guy is like so much better than the last relationship I had." So I was just like, oh, yeah, this is God's thing, right? And I still believe that that was God had sent that person to me for, for his purposes type of thing. And to be, for me during that time, that season of my life. Um, but probably not in the manner that I thought, type of thing. God always has not an ulterior motive, but he just has a better picture of what we need before we think we know what we need, type of thing. So, I remember being on the back patio of my house as in one of the last discussions that me and this person had, and he said, "You just bleed all over me. You just bleed all over everybody. Um, you just bleed all over everything." And in that moment, I didn't get it. I just remember sitting on the back patio praying, Lord, like, I give up. I just give up. I surrender. I don't know what the heck I'm doing anymore. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I thought I was doing stuff that I needed to do, but I just give up. I give up. I surrender. And again, while those last words hurt, and in that moment I just was totally hurt. I didn't understand what they meant. Um a few months later, I was reading this story, and then I was like, I get it now. Because he had said, you just bleed everywhere. And I was like, okay, I don't really get that. Like, why that? But when he said that, but then when I read this story, I was like, I am the bleeding woman, but in a whole different sense of the word bleeding. Um, and I didn't know it at the time, but I felt like I think I know now that I was bleeding like emotionally, spiritually, again, emotionally, um, because of my past, that the person that was there was just took it as I was bleeding on them type of thing. And the and I don't know if it was one of those like maybe I was making them feel unclean or something like that. Not really sure, but because I don't that was like one of the last conversations we had, but it like stood out to me. So when this story came up, um I knew that I needed to be in God's word from the beginning after that conversation. And then as I was reading and just I don't even know how I started. I remember getting like a few resources. I did 100 Days to Brave um, by Annie Downs. If you don't have that resource, it's amazing. Thrift Books, I think, has them, and also Amazon. So just a little shout out to her because that really helped me during that season of life as after all that happened as well. But I was reading this story at night in my bedroom one time, completely alone, because he had already left and we were separated. And I was just like I was studying in the morning before my kiddo got up. At that time, I was waking up at 5 in the morning. I don't do that anymore. But at that time, I was. And so I would study for like 2 hours in the morning, and then I would go to work, and then I would come home at night. And yeah, and what during that time I was doing hair at home. So I had like my own little salon inside my kitchen. But I remember that night being in bed after my kiddo had gone to bed. And as I was reading this story, I got to that verse and it said, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." And I just kept hearing him, like the Lord say, "Daughter, you are mine. Daughter, I love you." And I was the daughter, not this lady in the story. It was me. Like he was talking directly to me in that moment. And he used this story for that. And he just kept saying, "You don't need anything else. You just need me. I need you to want me," type of thing. And I felt like that's where I was at. Like I was just reaching for him. I was just reaching for that hem of his garment, just like she was. And I just didn't know it until that second, that night, that's what it was. So I feel like that was like my turning point. Um, and I love that's the reason I love that it doesn't give her her factual name on that. It's just daughter in this story. So in that way, all of us are his daughter. So no matter what you're going through, and I guess what I'm trying to say is that whatever you're going through, if you're going through something super hard right now, and you just don't feel like we're not I hate the saying, God only gives you he won't give you any more than you can handle. And I think that's entirely BS. That's entirely BS. He will always give us more than we can handle. And here's why. Is because if he only gave us what we can handle, we would never need him. So if you ever hear somebody say that, feel free to correct him because that saying is total just rubbish. And I get the verse where they're trying to pull this from, but context is everything when it comes to the Bible. And I just want you guys to know that if you feel like God's giving you way more than you can handle, He is, because He wants you to reach for the hem of His garment in that moment. Okay. Um, so yeah, so whatever you're going through, I want you, hopefully, I just will pray that you have a moment like I did where you can picture yourself as him saying, "Daughter, I love you. Daughter, I you don't need anything else besides me." And you are the daughter he is talking to. So yeah, I just pray that you feel his love, his compassion, just everything. Now, let's move on to the next part of the story because I could just talk about that lady all day long. But there's a little bit more to the story, but I feel like that's the part that I always connect with, and I always like to spend more time on that one than I do the rest of the story here. Because it goes on that Jesus continued on. And that's all he said. He said, "Daughter, let your suffering, you are freed from your suffering," right? And he just turns and keeps on going. Like so I think we also need to remember too that we are not um what's the word I'm looking for? A nuisance. We are not inconveniencing Jesus on his mission at all. You don't have to go through like five different other prayers before you're just so desperate and you're not hearing anything to finally just go to him. Just go to him. I guess is what I'm trying to say is you don't have to feel like you are inconveniencing him. Yeah, like you're not interrupting him from his mission at all. Like you are his mission. Um, so yeah, I just want everybody to remember that as we keep looking through this story is that you're not going to stop what he needs to do no matter how small you think your problem is you think oh well I can handle this because you're not handling it. It's not up to you to handle it. You just need to go to him and let him handle it. Life doesn't always get easier, but it gets better. I have found when I pray to him even for the littlest things, like if I can't find my reading glasses, I am saying, Lord, I've lost them again. I really need the Holy Spirit to show me where I put these stupid things again. Or where have I put my keys again? And one time I put my keys, just fun story. I didn't have my keys because my keys were in my husband's car. And I was searching all over the house because I had put in a Walmart pickup order for groceries and I needed to go pick up those stupid groceries. I couldn't find my keys anywhere. And my spare set he has on his keychain. So I didn't even have the spare set because he also had those in his car. So I'm like frantically calling. And then I kept thinking I really did put them somewhere. And I kept praying, Lord, show me where I put these keys. And I heard, you don't have your keys. So and I text my husband, I'm like, hey, I really think my keys are in your car or you've got them. And lo and behold, he did have them. So even if it's you can't find something that you've lost 100 times or more, don't be afraid to reach out to him because he's still going to say, oh, daughter, let me help you find what you've lost again. He's really good at finding things. So let's let him do that part for us, okay? But okay, so let's go on to the next story part of this because we don't have a whole lot of time left. So the next part is he goes on to Jairus's house. And when he walks through that door, they used to hire like professional wailing women, professional mourners, okay, when someone had died. I find that so odd, but I guess back then that's like a paying profession, okay? So these women would just be like, "Oh," like they are having a time, right? And the family's crying, and Jairus, I don't think he even really knew at that time until he got to the house, like, that she had passed, okay? He was still holding out hope that she hadn't, that Jesus could just help her, that he was just gonna touch her hand like he did Peter's mother-in-law, right? And he kinda did, but in a bigger way. So the only people he took into the room was Jairus, his wife, the mom, there was Jesus, Peter, and James. I wanna say there was one more, but I know for a fact that those are the ones that were in there, right? He sent everybody out, and they laughed at him, and he was like, "What are you crying for? She's not dead." And everybody was, like, mocking him and being like, "Oh, no, she's dead, alright," and all this type of stuff. Well, he sends everybody else out. Those guys go in, he grabs her hand and just touches her hand and says, "Wake up, daughter." And she wakes up like that. And you know what his answer is? Get her something to eat. She's hungry. She's hungry. And I was just like, okay, so the point of this story is you're not an interruption. You're not going to stop him from doing what he went to do, no matter how much you think that you are. And I just love that he was just like, okay, I already did help this woman. Cool. She had great faith in me. Jairus, no matter how much the other Pharisees were like, you shouldn't go ahead, don't ask him, like I can't get imagine that he was even like think he was only thinking that this was what he was going to do. He didn't even think about telling them what he was going to do because he knew that they were going to try to stop him. So yeah, that was a no. So, yeah, I don't know. I just love this story so much because it hits me personally, and I really do hope it does you guys too. Um, so yeah, I just hope that this kind of stays in the back of your heads and that you guys, I don't know, like I said earlier, whatever you're going through, just imagine you are daughter because you are. Okay? So don't forget that you are so, so loved and you're not an interruption. He loves you, he will stop for you, and he will help you. You don't have to worry about that other type of stuff that sometimes we get in our heads. Like, this is too little. He's not going to, like, why would I bother him with this? Just bother him with it because he will give you the answer that you need.